There are few things in this world we can be absolutely sure of. Water is wet. Fire is hot. And this symbol means to get louder. That's called a hairpin in music, named after the things at the bottom of my wife's purse. And everyone knows that it stands for crescendo. Turn it around, and it means diminuendo, to get softer. Duh. Sources as diverse as Wikipedia, MuseScore, and the Harvard Dictionary of Music all define hairpins as referring to changes in volume, also known as dynamics. The trouble is, for composers as monumental as Beethoven, Schubert, Chopin, Mendelssohn, Brahms, and Rachmaninoff, just to name a few, hairpins did not mean dynamics. Which, if it's true, is kind of a problem, because many musicians to this day are obsessed with deciphering the masterpieces all those genius composers left behind, and hairpins are everywhere in their scores. So this video is about how, no big deal, we musicians have just been lied to our entire lives. If you poke around on Reddit, you might find some chatter about hairpins referring to tempo rather than dynamics. That's Seymour Bernstein, pianist, composer, teacher, and author of many helpful books about piano playing. He was still a spring chicken, 92 years young, when I first filmed with him for Tone Bass. And in his lesson on Chopin's E minor prelude, he made one of the most audacious claims ever uttered by a piano teacher.
When the hairpin opens right here, that has nothing to do with dynamics.
This open hairpin doesn't refer exclusively to dynamics in 19th century scores, according to Seymour's research, but rather, it describes an expressive nuance, especially a fluctuation in timing. And the same goes for the fabled double hairpin.
Actually, this means rubato.
Now, I can't emphasize enough that what Seymour is saying here is contrary to what 99.9% of musicians and music teachers understand hairpins to mean. So Seymour built his case, methodically, over decades, armed with first-hand accounts from prominent 19th century musicians and, most importantly, passages from musical works where the most logical interpretation of a hairpin is tempo flexibility. One of his smoking guns,
irrefutable evidence,
came in the opening bars of Chopin's G minor Ballade.
Chopin has the following: the word diminuendo and a hairpin closing like this. Chopin is never redundant. So because the word diminuendo is there, what does it mean? We're to linger and then go ahead, as I did.
A few years after filming that lesson, I had the privilege of meeting up with Seymour in person for the second time, and once again, I broached the hairpin question. This time, we hopped on a video call with another hairpin truther, pianist and composer Logan Skelton, who came armed with a few early recordings of famous 19th century born pianists caught on tape treating hairpins as rubato. But during the call, he also reveals even more twists and turns in the whole hairpin story.
More subtle than that, more complex than that.
I'll try to untie some of those knots later in this video. But first, here's my conversation with Seymour and Logan. Seymour.
Yes.
We met a few years ago, a month before the COVID pandemic hit.
I remember.
And one of the things we filmed together was a now famous lesson that you taught on Chopin's E minor prelude. And in that lesson, you turned the piano world upside down because you started talking about what I'm now calling the hairpin question.
Oh, yes.
And you've become, in a way, the leading exponent of a certain interpretation, scholarly interpretation of 19th century hairpins. And I have a special guest and hairpin enthusiast whom you know, and I wanted to...
And I know this person?
I think so. Let's see.
Seymour, This is Logan Skelton.
Logan, no, Logan. Oh, my dear.
How are you?
Oh, I'm going to start to cry. You know how much I admire you.
Well, same. Same.
Oh, this is such a wonderful surprise.
I've been following your interviews and, of course, Monsters and Angels and Chopin.
Oh, wow.
And I've read all of it with great interest and benefited as a result over the years.
Now, Logan, you know how I came on to Hairpins? You know, years ago, do you remember the Piano Quarterly?
Yes.
You know, it's no longer, it's defunct now. Well, right before it went out of print, I read an article by Eric Heitzig. He's a brilliant pianist and teacher in France. He wrote this article about hairpins, and I read it and I didn't sleep all night. I took out my Chopin volumes, and he even, you know, it started with Beethoven, with the hairpins. And so I just flipped right out. And Richard Good, I was very friendly with him at that time. He was in the middle of his Beethoven series at the Y. I called him up. I said, Richard, stop what you're doing. Everything we're doing is wrong. What's wrong, Seymour? Hairpins no longer mean dynamics, they mean tempo fluctuation. And this is what I heard. Oh, no. So you can imagine Richard going in his mind immediately to the last three sonatas of Beethoven. All the hairpins are no longer dynamics.
Right.
You can just picture, well, but that's not true. You know, that's not so.
More subtle than that, more complex than that.
It all started with Eric Heitzig.
That's interesting. My journey with hairpins started with you.
Oh, this is so fascinating.
We were judging together and you did some sort of presentation and talked about it. And I immediately thought, how come I never heard about this before? But I started, as you did, I went back to scores and I started looking at them, and these things that always bothered me suddenly seemed to make sense.
Well, did you come upon indisputable evidence from Chopin where a hairpin is opening and the word diminuendo is in the middle of it?
Yes, I have some of those where you have many hairpins that if you do them dynamically, they don't make any sense at all. I have some where they're redundant, where you have diminuendo and a narrowing hairpin, or you have a crescendo and an expanding hairpin. I have some where you have the opposite, you know. Ben, I've been sharing a few with him. And you see the crescendo marking plus the expanding hairpin, and over it, all these small little accents, which are essentially hairpins. And everything says it's special, it's expressive, it's unusually melodic here.
Well, those little hooked accent marks over the D flat, the F, and the A flat, I call them expressive accents. They're usually softer and delayed, like this.
I figured that some of the older pianists might speak the language of these hairpins. And I have found a few recordings that I think are quite interesting. The first is by Paderewski.
Okay. Oh, yes. He did what I did, didn't he? He got softer as it. Well,
yeah.
Here's Rachmaninoff playing the same thing.
Let me hear.
Paderewski, Rachmaninoff.
Lingers on the top. Uh-huh.
I mean, this is hard evidence, Seymour.
Of course.
I have one more of Rachmaninoff. It's the opening of the Etude Opus 39, number 6 in A minor.
This one.
Oh, yes.
You know, everyone goes.
Yes, and he broadens out, doesn't he? I bet he's
Well,
going to broaden.
Most people do 2 crescendos, and they have a rough ending to both of those opening phrases. And then they play the piece very well, marvelously, but that diminuendo in the second phrase, followed by the expanding hairpin, it struck me as puzzling, and I wanted to see what that really meant. And I thought the best pianist to know what Rachmaninoff meant was Rachmaninoff.
But he very often never played what he wrote.
Well, listen to this.
Okay.
Listen to this.
I want to hear this now. Broadening out. Oh, and then he played an echo effect.
He did the dim. And he broadened.
Oh, how interesting.
If I were Rachmaninoff's composition teacher, I would tell him one thing. For the first phrase, he should put CRESC period with the expanding hairpin, and the second phrase, DIM with the expanding hairpin. I think he would be better to put the CRESC, because if I listen to it carefully, he plays the first phrase with an increase of volume and a small slowing down. And the second phrase is a diminuendo and a very large slowing down. And the two of them go together beautifully.
Could we hear that one more time? Because it's pretty remarkable what Rachmaninoff does. I think it's worth a second.
Oh, well, I think that is amazing what I just heard.
Let's hear it again.
I think this is amazing. That's why Rachmaninoff, of all the people who heard him play, they heard all the pianists that are alive at that time, all of them say he was the greatest. That's because he knew the creative process from composing.
And both Paderewski and Rachmaninoff played that moment in Chopin like they wrote it.
Yeah, sure.
Like those hairpins were their hairpins. Of course they know what it means.
Well, my instinct always told me that the music... Ben doesn't like this.
No. I do like it. Say it.
I'm going to say it anyway, even though he doesn't like it. The music told me so. Ben doesn't like me to say that because he thinks that my musical opinions come from within myself, but they are triggered by the music. They don't come from me. I didn't write the music. The music is telling me what it wants to do. And Ben has a hard time accepting such an idea.
I'm just an annoying skeptic, that's all.
Doesn't the music tell you everything, Logan?
No, sometimes I need guidance from people like you.
So now I came upon some evidence from Brahms himself. Fanny Davies, who was an English pianist and a pupil of Clara Schumann, she had the parts of its Brahms trio. And Brahms was going to have a rehearsal. He couldn't find his parts. So Clara Schumann said, Brahms, invite her to the rehearsal. No, I don't like people at a... Johannes, she's giving you the parts. Be decent and invite her, which he did. She wrote down, and it's in Cobbet's Encyclopedic Dictionary of Chamber Music. This is what she wrote. When Brahms writes this, are you able to see this? You're able to see the double hairpin?
Yes.
Okay, when he writes that, he means us to play with extra warmth and affection. Not only with sound, but with rhythm. It's a rubato sign.
I have to admit, as persuasive as Seymour is, I had been skeptical over the years. His claims are so sweeping and so contrary to conventional wisdom, they require even more evidence before a pianist like me is going to go and rethink the thousands of hairpins found across all of my favorite pieces. But after puzzling over it for a few years, and especially in researching for this video, I'm now more convinced than ever that Seymour's rubato hairpin theory is basically correct, with some small qualification. So before returning to Logan and Seymour at the end of this video, allow me now to linger a bit on some of the different voices and perspectives on the matter. First, let it be known that Johann Nepomuk Hummel and Carl Czerny both published treatises in the early 19th century in which they define hairpins in terms we're used to, as gradual dynamic change. These were serious musicians who had direct relationships with many of the great composers of the early 19th century, and Czerny especially is one of the most important figures in the history of music education. So that's enough to say, at least in theory, if not also in practice, there was already a tradition back then of reading hairpins as crescendos and diminuendos. But then at the end of the century, you have someone like Hugo Riemann, influential German music analyst and one of the founders of modern musicology, who understood hairpins as agogic, a term he coined, which basically means to accent a note with timing rather than dynamics. Although, curiously, Riemann reads the double hairpins the other way around from Seymour. Quote, "The open hairpin increases shortening of the values, the closed hairpin decreases stress." But the point is, Europe's leading music scholar at the end of the 19th century is defining hairpins as tempo fluctuation, while earlier the same century, two leading musicians working in the same geographical region are defining hairpins as dynamic change. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that the definition of hairpins evolved from dynamics to agogics in the 19th century and then back again to dynamics in the 20th, but rather that in the Romantic era, both definitions of hairpins coexisted, and that hairpins, for the most part, probably meant either or even both simultaneously to different musicians, music teachers, and music students at different times and in different places. In what proportion, I'm not exactly sure. But what is interesting to me is that the more you dig into the historical record, the more instances you find where hairpins must have indicated an ebb and flow of time for many of the most prominent composers of the Romantic era, even if interpretations differ on when to ebb and when to flow. And the most compelling evidence comes from examining scores and early recordings. So, returning to Rachmaninoff, listen to him linger Seymour style inside every double hairpin in his own prelude in G-flat. Then there's the question of single hairpins. In that Piano Quarterly article Seymour cited, Eric Heidsieck tells the remarkable story of asking Arthur Rubinstein how he interprets the closed hairpin sign in a famous passage from Chopin's Heroic Polonaise, to which Rubinstein shouted scornfully, "Crescendo and accelerando!" Despite the story, Seymour's gut tells him that both open and closed hairpins in general imply a slowing down, not a speeding up. And we hear just that approach in a recording by none other than Fanny Davies, who provided that eyewitness account of Brahms in rehearsal that we heard earlier. Here she is playing Robert Schumann's A Curious Story in 1929. And the story gets very curious indeed, since the more you look into it, the more you realize that different composers in the Romantic era used hairpins to describe different kinds of expression across different kinds of musical passages. In other words, context matters. In his 2012 article, The Brahmsian Hairpin, David Hyun-Soo Kim writes that in Brahms' circles, hairpins inspired a great variety of realizations. Everything from agogic inflection, vibrato, portamento, chord rolling, hand displacement, and yes, dynamics. But of all these techniques, he writes, by far the most common technique is agogic inflection, meaning, again, accentuating a note with timing rather than volume. So now consider Ilona Eibenschütz, who studied with Clara Schumann and Brahms, and also recorded Brahms' E minor intermezzo, Opus 119 No. 2. And in the recording, you can hear two things pretty clearly. Number one, to quote Clara talking to Brahms, "I do not think Ilona understands the pieces as they need to be understood. She goes too quickly over everything," which is kind of true here. But also, number two, when she does slow down considerably, it's in the presence of a hairpin. In the famous B minor intermezzo from the same opus, Brahms wrote closed hairpins above each of the first three measures, and he also wrote a letter to Clara revealing how they should be played. "Every bar and every note must sound like a ritardando," he wrote, as though one wanted to extract melancholy from each, with sensual pleasure from the dissonances. Now, these are just to name a few of the innumerable passages throughout the standard repertoire from the late 18th century to the early 20th, where hairpins seem to mean something other than dynamics, probably rhythmic flexibility, from as early as Haydn, Beethoven, and Schubert to Mendelssohn, Chopin, and Liszt, all the way through Brahms, Rachmaninoff, Scriabin, even Schoenberg. And I document, demonstrate, and discuss many of these examples compiled by Logan Skelton and other pianist scholars in an extended video that you can access by signing up as a Patreon Silver member. And if you upgrade to the Gold tier, you'll also get to view my bonus scenes from the call with Logan and Seymour, plus a second full video of me elaborating on even more hairpin questions and confronting some of the more perplexing examples head on, based on what I learned in an eye-opening chapter from Roberto Poli's book, The Secret Life of Musical Notation. Now, Poli makes a compelling case that Chopin and other composers used hairpins of different sizes and in different contexts, not only to refer to rhythmic flexibility, but also sometimes to clarify aspects of polyphony and meter, which I go over in detail. But that leads me to why. Why have I spent hours, or in Seymour's case, decades, pondering and researching the nuanced meanings of these little wedge-shaped things? At the end of the day, shouldn't we just play music how we feel it and get on with our lives? Well, yes, but that's exactly why the question arose in the first place. Musicians like Seymour noticed that interpreting certain hairpins as dynamics just felt wrong, or, as Roberto Poli writes, what I had felt to be musically instinctive was often hindered by preconceived notions about symbols that I tended to interpret mechanically. It was only by ridding myself of interpretive dogmas that compelled me to respond to hairpins as dynamic indications that I was able to liberate my imagination from the musical prison in which, until then, I had been held captive. In other words, we've been missing out on a whole world of interpretive freedom and flexibility just by accepting the dogma that hairpins always equal dynamics. It's genuinely shocking to me how widespread this dogma was for so many great 20th century pianists who were otherwise dedicated to realizing a composer's intention. Take Paul Badura-Skoda, who couldn't compute an open hairpin in between two diminuendo signs in his edition of Chopin's Trois Nouvelles Etudes, leading him to suggest that what he saw as a crescendo fork preceding the diminuendo sign might be a writing slip by Chopin. Then there's the late Alfred Brendel, who adopted a more creative solution to a hairpin malfunction at the end of Liszt's B minor sonata, where, in Brendel's words, before the three pianissimo B major chords, there is a crescendo on one chord, which one has to convey bodily with a gesture. It's the only possibility, he writes. Of course, it's only the only possibility if you believe that the open hairpin must mean crescendo, whereas interpreting the hairpin as expressive timing and color allows for the possibility to perhaps linger a little bit on the distant F major chord before it finally resolves to B major. But instead, just look at the lengths our most learned 20th century pianists have gone based on this one-dimensional reading of hairpins. For many aspiring pianists, rubato is treated as a matter of personal expression, spread indiscriminately around phrases based on subjective impulses and often accompanied by involuntary choreographic movements, though far less thoughtful than Brendel's. Sure, there's no scientific proof that a musical symbol equals this, nor a moral imperative that you must do that when you see one. You can play however you want, it's just music. But something special happens the deeper you engage with these texts. You begin to identify with the music and absorb it in a process of self-discovery that is rational and emotional and physical all at once. I mean, here we have composers actually showing us precise moments to take liberties, which are logical and rooted organically in the unfolding of musical material. Ultimately, though, they're just hints about how we might make sense of our surroundings and maximize our freedom of movement and expression within objective musical conditions. And once you think about them that way, romantic musical scores basically become manifestos about how to get free. And hairpins, it turns out, are a way to pick the lock on that musical cage we've all been trapped inside of. And this kind of freedom in music I never would have thought of if it weren't for that firebrand, Mr. Seymour Bernstein.
I've thought over the years that the ghosts of Seymour's thoughts live on in me. And I find that these little gems rattle around in my brain for years, and they kind of have taken on a life of their own. And it's like if a little rock floating through space gets gravitationally affected by some other celestial body, the course of its path is changed. There's something like that going on. And also, Ben was talking to me about trying to put into words what you've meant to me over the years. And it's difficult to say that in words, but I have an image in mind that I think you would understand very well. Music scores, music notation, it's the composer's attempt to communicate something to you, timing, sounds, textures, feelings, emotions, structure. They're trying to communicate to you. It's like the score is a hand pointing at something. And Seymour, and I think I feel this way very much, your job in studying scores is not to look at the hand that's pointing and study the hand that's pointing and try to imitate the hand that's pointing. Your job is to try to see what the hand is pointing at.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But there's something else that I have never told you. That through the years, I discovered that there's a microcosm within me that is exact replica of the macrocosm. And it's in all living people. And what happens is that there is information embedded in that microcosm as there is in the universe, a priori. And the music awakens these secret knowledges that we come upon as musicians. It's already embedded in us. We're born with it. It's embedded in him. Sometimes you don't hear it, Then you say this person's unmusical. I thought he was unmusical. He's the most musical person you can't imagine. This happened overnight, as a matter of fact. I met him yesterday, and I hear him play with emotional projection for the first time since I know him. He's opened up. And then I call that area within us the spiritual reservoir. Mm. We're all born with a spiritual reservoir. And do we ever tap it? Of course not. Because when we're born, we depend on outside influences. We can't tap that. We have to have teachers helping us to read and write. And unfortunately, religious teachers try to teach us what the real facts are, which they don't know about, but they pretend that they do. And so we're always relying on influences from the outside. My pupils can't play a recital without playing for me first.
Mm.
And I tell them you have to rely on your own spiritual reservoir to tell you what to do. You're not going to have me forever. So, isn't that interesting?
Yes, it reminds me of a quote of Franz Kafka. I may remember it not exactly right, but he said, "Art is the axe to the frozen sea within."
Whoa, the frozen sea within. It melts, doesn't it?
Or shatters.